Один, два, три. Доброго дня, шановні гості. Ми надзвичайно вдячні, що ви прийшли. Grateful that you came today and that you're interested in this topic. In the first place, some technicalities. Our today's meeting will be bilingual. It will be in English and Ukrainian. If you do not require interpretation, and that's okay, you can listen to the speeches and make comments in both Ukrainian or English. But if you require interpretation, you can get the headsets that are located at the back of the room. So if everything is fine, and then a couple of words about the format of our today's meeting. After the presentations, we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A session. And of course, if you have any comments, remarks, or suggestions, we will be really happy to hear them out. I would like to also say that our event is being broadcasted on YouTube in Ukrainian, English, and YouTube. So for those who are watching us on both Facebook and YouTube, I encourage you to please submit your questions or Everything that you will hear today, we will definitely ask these questions to our speakers. We will mention them. So, without any further ado, let us get started. My name is Ruslan Denichenko, and I am the co-founder and executive director of StopFake. We have been monitoring Russian propaganda and disinformation for years now. We have thousands of the fakes that have been refuted by us, the one that were spread by the Russian propaganda. And we have came to realization that they are adapting to the changing context, creating new narratives, creating new channels which allow them to reach their target audience. And of course, we always were wondering how effective are we in reacting at this propaganda and disinformation, our countries. And clearly, it is not only aimed at Ukraine. However, Ukraine probably was the country where the majority of all these tricks and disinformation were tried out. Nevertheless, when we were offered to join this research, and that was carried out in 10 countries, the aim of which is to understand how efficient are these countries in overcoming new challenges, how efficient are they in adapting to these new challenges. So, to tell you more about this research and its methodology, I have invited the experts, and we are gonna start with our guest, who is in Prague, if I'm not mistaken. Pavel Havlíček. He will join us online from Prague. So, Pavel, what is this research about? How was it carried out? Who worked on it? Could you please tell us more about it?
Thank you so much, Ruslan. I hope you can hear me and you can see me also. Yes, thank you so much. I hope you can also see my presentation that I've tried to share with you. I will take the floor for a couple of minutes to tell you more about the actual research that we have conducted together with the team of East Center, with my colleague Veranika Laputska, who made it to Kiev, unlike me, and also Andrei Yelitsev, who was the first editor in chief of the whole publication. To which I was also contributing and also helping to carry out the publication that has, as you mentioned yourself, Ruslan, has 10 country chapters, but also close to 300 pages of quality research, as I would say. So I hope you can see the presentation. I will try to share it again with you just to make sure that everything works. Here it is. So, as you, Ruslan, you said yourself already, the Disinformation Resilience Index is an exercise that we have conducted for the second time this year. From the first edition in 2018, we have included 10 countries, and the team of East Center, together with myself, also as a contributing editor from Association for International Affairs, has conducted this enormous effort. So, as we have mentioned already, we have covered 10 countries of Visegrad, 4 from my country, Czechia, but also Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary, and then obviously included the 6 Eastern Partnership countries, with a simple idea to actually find out what is the state of resilience towards disinformation, but also as an underlying tone, how we can help each other, how we can exchange best practice, and actually talk about more in depth what we are facing in terms of challenges. This year we have focused not only on the traditional challenge that you in Ukraine understand so well, which is the Russian Federation and its ongoing hybrid operation, hybrid war against Ukraine, but also more recently we have included China and other factors that are undermining the domestic resilience in all of our 10 countries. Among the research institutions that were included in this year's edition of the research, you see my own Association for International Affairs and also the East Center, as I have mentioned already. But here you have the full list of other 10 institutions that we have cooperated with to have an in-depth quality insight from each of the 10 countries that were included in this year's edition. This also includes obviously the 3 South Caucasian countries, but also other 3 Visegrad countries and Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova as well. As for the goal of the study, and this is already going to the core of what you mentioned, Ruslan, in your questions, what is the purpose of this study? I've already hinted on this, but to go more in detail here, we need to say that the second edition of the research has aimed at exposing the sort of influences that we in Central Europe, but also in Eastern Europe, are facing. This is, as I mentioned already, the threat from Russian Federation, but also from China, and also the domestic landscape that we have also tried to incorporate in this year's edition. But most of all, and first of all, you will hear about Russia and China, that are the biggest challengers of the resilience in each of our countries. And obviously, the big part of the research has also paid attention on the responses, both by the state, but also civil society and independent media. And what are the good practice, as I mentioned, that each of the countries might offer or share with the other partners. As I've already hinted, this is the second edition of the research. The first one was conducted in 2018, and we have also tried to incorporate a comparative element. So how the situation changed over the 3-year-long period, how the situation developed, what kind of recommendations were already implemented in the period from 2018, and how much of new reality we are actually facing. For example, when now talking much more in depth about China, as I mentioned. So here, these are all the sort of new elements, but we have tried as much as we could to keep the research comparative and to include the main pillars of the original 2018 Disinformation Resilience Index in the most recent edition that you can read and you can just have a look right now. Finally, some of the new elements, as I've already spoken about, is the institutional setup, because that is something that developed in pretty much all the countries of the 10 that we had a look at. In terms of regulatory framework, there were also multiple changes, not only in my country, in the Czech Republic, for example, when the Czech military counterintelligence military intelligence actually got new power to operate in the cyber domain, officially given by the law that we have struggled and finally passed after 7 years. But there are other developments in terms of the regulatory and legal framework as well in the other countries as well. And finally, obviously, the media landscape has developed enormously in each of the countries. For example, if I may give just one idea, for example, the Hungarian situation has developed enormously in this context, when the regime of Viktor Orban has launched this huge conglomerate of media called Kezma that we have tried to pay attention as well. To jump further and tell you more about how the chapters are actually structured and clustered, what we have tried to achieve in the report is to include not only the sort of quantitative elements of the study that Veranika will talk more in detail about, but also to have quality research based on more than 12 interviews in each of the countries, and actually cover information clustered in these 6 areas. First of all, the disinformation studies, which is always a starting point for each of the articles from each of the countries, and tries to offer sort of a comparative perspective on what is already on the market. This is a sort of review of existing knowledge on the subject that we have maybe included and are new in the field over the last 3 years. The second pillar, and here I've spoken about China, which is a new sort of element when compared with the previous edition of the research. We have tried to give enough attention to both Russia and China as the biggest sort of challengers of the resilience in each of the 10 countries. Then this is the media landscape that I've already spoken briefly about, how enormously this developed. And the same goes for the framework, both legal and institutional. And I gave you the example from the Czech Republic, but there are a number of others from across the 10 countries. And finally, and this is very important, and we have tried to be positive, but because not in all the 10 countries, we had this opportunity to be very positive, because in some contexts, not so much actually changed, and there was not so much of progress as the civil society and media would like to have. So here we have really tried to gather as much as positive examples, positive stories, how we might actually enrich each other and help each other to exchange the best practice, and sometimes also bad practice that we are seeing in some of the more difficult contexts, such as in Belarus, such as in Azerbaijan, for example, where the independent media and civil society have played enormous role to actually counterbalance the negative role played by the local regimes, for example, when trying to go as close to Russia and China as possible. And finally, and this is the same as we tried to do in 2018, we try to give recommendations on what should be done based on the local context. Some of the main takeaways. Yes, Ruslan, please.
Pavel, we have to wind up and move on. So could you please be brief?
This is the last slide that I have for you. These are the main takeaways that we have encountered, but you will hear much more from the country experts, and they will give you much more sort of in-country look, and give you perspective on what each of the national contexts actually bring. But there are some overlying tendencies and trends that I just wanted to very briefly list, and here you have them display basically on the slide. So as I mentioned, it is most of the time the case that there are very few recommendations and very little progress made since 2018. So issues that we have covered in the previous edition of the publication are still very much relevant, and there is still the missing political will to move things forward. This is one. Second, as we spoke briefly about the regulation, there are still many gaps that needs to be addressed, needs to be closed. This goes both for the legal and institutional setup, but also a missing link between civil society and state. This is one of the big conclusions that we are seeing all across the board. The third one that I already spoke briefly, Belarus and Azerbaijan are outliers. Other results in 8 countries are mixed, but these two are exploding in extreme way, in very negative way. And finally, pardon me, this is the civil society and media that we found so important to actually bolster, facilitate the cooperation with the state, and to look for good practice and innovative solutions exactly when it comes to the very good work of the civil society and independent media. This is all I have for you. Sorry for taking a little bit longer, Ruslan. I hope you excuse me, but I hope that this is actually a very nice introduction to what you will hear next. Thank you so much, and greetings from Prague.
Дуже дякую, Павел. Я помітив, що все більше і більше
Pavel, I noticed that experts have been talking about not only Russian propaganda, but about China as well. So I have a question to our next speaker, to Ms. Veranika Laputska from Warsaw, from East Center. What other interesting observations can you share with us based on the research? Thank you, Ruslan. I will have to switch to English because my Ukrainian is not as good as it should be.
channel, please do, because I will be speaking English now. And in my presentation, I would like to share with you some insights of their methodology itself, because our research, as you probably have noticed, consists of two parts. So one is actually country studies, and the other one, which I was authoring, is more based on quantity-based questions. What we did in this, we are together with the writing country chapters, we also were talking to experts, media expert journalists, people from civil society in each of 10 countries, and they were answering questionnaires. And then we collected the data, and this is what we have. I will show you now. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know whether you're familiar with our research from 2018, but this time we particularly wanted to look into resilience of each of 10 countries we were covering, and we wanted to see how three elements of in each country are resilient to foreign-led disinformation. For this purpose, we decided that we're going to have societal resilience indicator, and there we included not only resilience of the society, but also civil society, how resilient it is. So we were looking kind of into this wider perspective, society and civil society. And you can see what were kind of the elements of this indicator. So it's popularity of manipulation spread media, and also initiatives of civil society and so on. For the indicator B, we took legal and institutional resilience. For this purpose, we looked into legal changes and legal regulations of all the countries. We looked how resilient were the institutions, and we looked whether there are actually long-term overall measures being taken care of in each country. And this time, what we did in this research, we also specifically introduced an indicator which is gaining more and more popularity and relevance. It's the resilience of online and media sphere. And there, for the first time, for this kind of research, we also were looking into bloggers, online activists, and influencers, whether they actually spread any manipulative context, whether they misuse their audience and the popularity they're having in social media, whether they are becoming kind of a new threat to our information security in our countries. And as I said, so we have basically two main kind of approaches for these questions. I'll show you the questions in the second. One is descriptive, so we were looking into the progress. We were looking into the situational trend in each country, and performative. There we were assessing the performance or progress in each country since 2018. In each country, there were from 12 to 26 respondents. 26 were in Ukraine, which also was an indicator for us in this country where we are today now. This question is really important, and a lot of people were actually interested in taking part of this. And of course, another conclusion is that our country expert Olga was doing her job really well. So he managed to really reach out to a lot of people who were eager to be part of this research. And for the assessment of this, we took a Likert 5-point scale and measured each question which we were sending to our respondents from 1 to 5. And this I will not guide you through all the questions because they are here, and you also can look at them in the book. So basically, as I said, these questions are from indicator A, societal resilience. They are assessing the resilience of the society and civil society. We're talking about Chinese narratives there, and civic initiatives and NGOs, any debunking and fact-checking initiatives. In indicator B, we are looking into long-term measures and also into institutional framework, legal changes, whether there have been any improvements. As you see here, we also have a few questions which are assessing the progress, which should have taken place since 2018. And in indicator C, as you see, there are questions covering media which operate online, also online bloggers, activists, influencers, how active they are in spreading misleading narratives, what they do, and whether there is also legislation in our 10 countries which we were studying, which can actually tackle this issue, tackle this problem. And another question which was very important for us was, of course, the last one here is how effective actually the online community, activist community, is in fighting disinformation. So not only spreading, but also fighting. We wanted to see whether there are actually influencers and bloggers and online activists who really are aware of this problem and who want to fight with it. And these are the results. So the darker is the color, the more resilient is the country. This is what we saw when we were looking into societal resilience. As you see here, kind of the weakest countries are Armenia, Belarus, and Moldova. In terms of legal and institutional resilience, Belarus again is one of the weakest. Then we have Georgia and Hungary. But overall, I have to say that in all 10 countries we were covering, all experts made the point that this indicator, this very field of legal institutional resilience is the weakest in absolutely all the countries. And all the experts who were talking to, they underline this fact that they're not happy with how the state and the governmental institutions are trying to tackle this issue. They're not happy with the measures they are taking, and they believe that there should be more done in this regard. And if we look into media digital resilience, we see that Armenia, Hungary, Moldova, and Poland are the weakest. But what is also interesting in this very field are Azerbaijan and Belarus were kind of their champions. And I will tell you in a second what kind of conclusions we made out of this very observation. And this is the comparison, so that you can look pretty much what is the difference between different countries. As you see, these are all particular 3 indicators per each country. And again, if you look into orange color, you can see that really legal institutional resilience and really the lowest, and in absolutely all the countries. And if we look into Belarus and Azerbaijan, they have quite the strongest actually media and digital resilience. And in terms of society, you can see that Ukraine, Czechia, but also Slovakia and Poland and Hungary kind of are the leaders here. And I'll tell you now what else we realized. So first of all, we understood that if we look into the country of map of Visegrad countries and Eastern Partnership states, Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia, and Ukraine, of course, these are the countries which have the highest level of resilience overall in all 3 indicators. If we kind of have the average indicator calculated out of 3. Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, and Moldova possess the strongest media and digital sphere. But this, of course, is only if we compare it to other 2 indicators. And going back to Azerbaijan and Belarus, as Pavel, also my colleague, said that they're really the outliners here. And here we notice this peculiar thing that their online sphere and media are the strongest among all the countries we talked to. But here I think that, of course, we have to take consideration that in those countries, there are expectations for legal, institutional, societal resilience is not that strong. And of course, in comparison with 2 other spheres, which are really, I would say, doing very bad, media and NGO are really these 2 fields which are the strongest and which are doing their best to somehow be resilient, to somehow fight foreign-led discrimination and disinformation, and information manipulation. And also what was interesting for us is that when we were talking about Chinese disinformation, for instance, we realized that in some countries, experts, but also media professionals and civil society activists, they don't really see that as a threat at all. For instance, in Caucasian countries, we were talking about we saw that this kind of indicator was the lowest in terms of really their threat coming from China. But that's also, of course, because this issue is not talked about on an official level and in society. This is not perceived as something which can be really threatening. However, in Central Europe, in Czechia, Slovakia, in Poland, people talk a lot about this threat coming from China on different levels, and also from the perspective on disinformation. And also in these countries, we saw that kind of these three countries are the most susceptible to Chinese disinformation. Of course, this might be also the case that there are more just narratives coming from this from China into these countries, but this is also something for us to think about and to see that Chinese disinformation also shouldn't be underestimated in countries like Belarus and Ukraine and Moldova. We should all be monitoring this and how it is constructed, because it's a different approach, completely different one from Kremlin-led. So we have to take care of this and take a note on that. As I said, also, all 10 countries demonstrated really the lowest level of legal institutional resilience. Also, I have to congratulate you, dear guests, and you, dear colleagues, that Ukraine, according to our research, showed the strongest actually resilience to foreign disinformation. I think this is also thanks to your work and the work of some of your colleagues who are here today with us. But of course, there are still a lot of efforts which should be made and a lot of work which should be done. There's also, I would like to share with you a little disclaimer that, of course, this research is partially on quantity, partially on quality basis. So a lot of this can contain a little bit of bias coming from different perceptions, so different experts we're talking to. And of course, more research should be done in this regard. But overall, I think what should be the main outcome out of this and out of this kind of more quantity-based results I've just shared with you is that we should invest more into legal and institutional framework, into more reforms in our countries, in countries of Visegrad region and Eastern Partnership. We should definitely continue to support media and online sphere, because in authoritarian countries like Belarus or Azerbaijan, these are the only kind of islands of freedom where these are people who are fighting not only for their own freedom and their own activities, but also with the disinformation, do need support from international community and from foreign and international partners. And another thing I wanted to show you is that, unfortunately, because the rating really didn't change much since 2018. So the countries who were leaders remain the leaders, the countries who were outliners remain so, which also meant that despite so many efforts which were made by, again, international community partners, endorsed, and also a lot of organizations working inside, still countries kind of are showing similar results as they did 3 years ago, despite so many things happening, despite the pandemic, despite all this disinformation which is related to vaccination, and which is really an issue of health security of all people. So we should really think how to approach this. And of course, at the end of our presentation, we will be also happy, as Ruslan said, to hear maybe you have any suggestions, any thoughts, what else we can do, because here we all are experts and you all are professionals, and it would be a good place for us to exchange some thoughts between us. Thank you so much.
Дуже дякую, Вероніка. І
Thank
зараз ми
you,
переходимо
Veronika. And
до
now
огляду
we'll
секцій
start
регіональних
discussing
регіонального дослідження. Отже,
regional
до яких висновків прийшли
sections of
експерти
the
в
research.
Україні,
So what are the
Молдові,
experts' conclusions in
Грузії
Ukraine,
і
Moldova,
Білорусі?
Georgia, and Belarus?
Почнемо з України, але
Let's
перед тим,
start
як
with
я
Ukraine,
передам
but
мікрофон
before
нашій
I hand the floor over to our next speaker, Ms. Olga Yurkova from StopFake, let me remind you, let me remind those that are watching us on YouTube, you can comment and we'll be reading out the questions. In Ukraine, we have a tradition. We complain a lot about the government doing all their own things and complaining about the previous government, some derogatory names of the previous ministries, Ministry of Information, have a lot of complaints. But nonetheless, based on what we just saw, the research actually showed that it's not all that bad. So, Olga, question for you. Why aren't we the worst, really?
The
Hi, everyone. And I'd like to tell that this is not my assessment. This is assessment of the experts that I surveyed. Some of them are present here. They were filling in the online form and were evaluating information resilience in Ukraine. And for me, it was a surprise that Ukraine appear to be among the top countries. I have just been thinking about that. And of course, I think that by no means it matters that we can chill and relax and that everything is great in Ukraine. In my opinion, it means that we actually were faced with the biggest threat. And we were the closest to this threat. That is why we had to become resilient. We didn't have any other way out. It doesn't mean that we're super resilient and all experts that I have spoken with, even though they gave higher points compared to others, they were quite skeptical regarding our information resilience. So I wanted to point that out. Now, moving on to my conclusions that were also based on the expert interviews and studying the situation in Ukraine. Of course, all of the complex processes that are happening in Ukraine was very difficult to fit them into 20 pages. But I think that is even more difficult is to present it all to you within 7 to 10 minutes. So I'll try to be as brief and to the point as possible. So here, I have pointed out some of the things that I believe are probably, well, and these are the things that have changed in 3 years' time. And these are the things that pose the biggest threat and the biggest challenge. So here I'd like to mention the following. It's very good that we have a sociological survey that is carried out by Detector, Media, US8, and Internews. They're using the same methodology year after year that allows us to see the attitude towards the narratives of Russian disinformation, media literacy, etc. So when looking at those figures, the media literacy index this year by Detector Media demonstrates that media literacy, it was a very comprehensive study when different opinions of people in Ukraine were analyzed. And it demonstrated that 48% of Ukrainians, their media literacy is below average. So pretty much 50%, I would say, rounding it up. But on the other hand, Ukrainians say that they are quite media literate, so they have quite a good self-esteem. And the third number by US8 interviews is people were not simply asking about how do they evaluate their own media literacy, but they had to distinguish fake news from the true news, and only 3% unfortunately managed to do that in 2020. In 2019, it was 11%. So this dramatic gap between your self-evaluation and the reality is quite disturbing. Another tendency is people have a clearer position and attitude to the Russian narrative, to the topics that are quite painful, which relate to language. This is something that the Russian propaganda abuses. Then Maidan, what it was it the coup d'etat or was it the revolution of dignity? And the topic of Russian aggression in Donbass. The attitude became clearer, but at the same time, according to others, the number of people who have not yet understood exactly how they treat it has increased. And a large number of people are intuitively approaching the news, and they do not care about who owns this media outlet. They just look at it and they believe it, and they are the ones who decide whether it's true or false. And another challenge is the one that has to do with infodemic and huge amount of the fake news that came as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And 1/3 of people shared COVID fakes, according to the research. And about 1/3 of people believe these fakes. And another concerning number is the vaccination rates in Ukraine. It is only about 15% at the moment, which I believe also speaks for itself in this context. And other things that are ongoing on the hybrid character of influence. So here I'm not only talking about the fake news, but also looking for the weak links in society, and Surkovlik's research demonstrated that. It was published in Ukraine. That this weak link can be both journalists, civic activists, people on different positions, decision makers, and that is why we have to also respond to it in a comprehensive and holistic manner. And adding to that, the Russian narratives are being disseminated by various sources, and there is kind of a rebranding, revamping. So it is not that the target audience always sees them as the Russian media or pro-Russian media outlet. And this is also dangerous because people don't understand the threat of the Russian media, and they do support the restriction of Russia's influence, but they do not always understand that this media outlet actually originates from the Russian Federation when they come across this fake news or disinformation. Now, next chapter of our research is dedicated to relations with Russia, potential risks. So over these 3 years, Russia became the #3 trade partner for Ukraine. So we have managed to diversify our economy, but it still is the main supplier of energy resources, even though the diversification is also happening in this area. And Russians are the investors into the critical areas of economy, such as heavy industry or mobile companies. The majority of mobile companies have their share that belongs to the Russians. But there also are some wins. For example, the law on the state language was adopted because it restricts the impact of the Russian language in over 30 various domains. And it doesn't regulate your personal communication, but the Russian propaganda is trying to abuse that. And another thing is restricting the impact and influence of the Russian church, because in Russia, the religion is a very, very powerful channel for influence. And the fact that Ukraine has managed to get its Thomas, that we got the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and that Ukrainian Orthodox Church became independent from the Russian one, according to the outcomes of the research, demonstrates that the majority of Ukrainian Orthodox are identifying themselves as the followers of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, even though the Russian Orthodox Church still has certain impact. And the main narratives are the same. They are trying to bring Ukraine into its sphere of influence by sabotaging the peaceful settlement in the east of Ukraine. And the experts doubt that Russia will really agree to peacefully settling the situation in the east. And the research also has demonstrated that the main narratives are about source and external governance in Ukraine, even though the old narratives are also still alive, still there. So anti-Western, about how West is not willing to help us and how the West left us all alone, and anti-Ukrainian narratives, as I have named them. The narratives that are saying that Ukraine is a failed state. So this is a narrative that is discrediting Ukrainian government, Ukrainian army, Ukrainian church, everything Ukrainian, especially Ukrainian army. And especially vulnerable is the east and the south of the country. So, there is this persona of a vulnerable citizen, the person living in the southeast of Ukraine in their late 40s, that is living quite a poor life. So this is the biggest risk group. Another large part of the research is dedicated to relations with China and potential vulnerabilities in this context. Very little attention is paid to that, and this is poorly studied in Ukraine. But China, at the moment, is the biggest trade partner for Ukraine, both in terms of importing and exporting. Another interesting thing is that China has achieved all of its goals in Ukraine. It doesn't have any peculiar goals in Ukraine as the Russian Federation. They have probably global goals all over the world, conquering new markets, technologies, especially military technologies, and replacing the US as a world leader in many domains. And in Ukraine, China has access to markets. 95% of technology in terms of military cooperation, and there is a small percentage of the defense technology that China does not yet have. Another thing. Well, this demonstrates that China now. And one more thing. IT. Ukrainian IT is controlled by China a lot because the hardware for the internet providers and the mobile operators mainly is produced by Huawei company. Now, the channels of influence, the embassy, that disseminates quite a neutral narrative about the attractiveness of cooperation. At the high and political level, China is not keeping in touch with Ukraine much. If we talk about the presidential level, we do not have such close ties. And an important thing is that in the national safety strategy, China is not mentioned as the strategic partner, but in other strategies, China is mentioned as the country with which we need to strengthen the strategic partnership. And the experts are pointing out that at the high political level, there is an understanding of the threats and red lines. Say that Ukraine is trying to cooperate with China in terms of trade, but at the same time to not become China's political partner. But at the mid-political level, there is no such understanding because various documents mention various things. And if we're talking about the society's resilience, we have a unique case. When the society lacks information, because there was one research dedicated to understanding whether China acts as a stabilizer or destabilizer, and it covered 45 countries. And Ukrainians were divided into following three groups. 1/3 said that it is a stabilizer, 1/3 that it is destabilizer, and 1/3 could not answer because they lack information. So we can assume that Ukrainians lack information to give a clear opinion regarding that. And now, very briefly, about Chinese narratives in Ukraine. And they are quite simple. First, attractiveness of cooperation. Looks is quite a nice narrative. But others can be risky if not threatening. For example, there was a narrative that is being disseminated not by the official China, by pro-China experts and organizations that are funded by China, and some research by academia that are funded by China. And sometimes they are developed by the institutions that are developing the analytics for the government. And the narratives are as follows: that Ukraine should avoid criticizing China for human rights violations, which is already a threat to our values because we have the European values. And Ukraine's policy should balance between the US and China, which is not exactly in line with our Euro-Atlantic course. And this is also quite a risky narrative. And the main threat is ignoring China's influence, because on the one hand, it is not as active as in the Russian Federation, but on the other hand, if we do not pay enough attention to that, we can find ourselves amidst another crisis at the same time that we are living through the Russia crisis. And then we're going to have two hybrid threats, even though China is not going to be the armed threat. And now, the main changes in media landscape. Of course, sanctions imposed on the so-called Medvedchuk's channels, 112, Zik, and News One TV channels. it was mainly supported by the experts, but at the same time, it was mentioned that this is a temporary solution. And this is, it is like trying and shutting the mouth of every pro-Russian media outlet. But this is not a systemic solution. As I have previously mentioned, there are lots of such sources. And this is like a mythical creature. If you cut one head off, two more will grow out. And also another issue is that many media outlets are still owned by oligarchs. And also during the pandemic and the elections, we had 3 elections in Ukraine. And then the national TV channels started losing the trust. So the trust level to them started dropping. Also because each of the TV channels was choosing their favorite politician whom they were trying to advocate for during the elections. And the trust has increased to the regional media. But we see the increase in trust in social media and messengers, especially Telegram. Telegram, in general, is the source of information for many people who are making decisions in Ukraine. Another thing worth mentioning is over these 3 years, the public broadcaster was evolving. It appeared in 2017, and there was poor funding of this public broadcaster, but at the same time, they managed to stick to quality journalism. This year, they received plenty of funding. It is very important for the governments to facilitate their work and the civil society to not prevent them from doing their job, create an interesting product, because this is exactly something that can help us to deal with the oligarchs in media markets. Now, talking about legal framework. In 2020, the national security strategy was adopted, and based on it, many other strategies were either adopted or are in the process of being developed. For example, one of the strategies was signed by the NSDC, National Security and Defense Council, and this is good because this sets the strategic framework for the legislation and regulating how the disinformation will be countered in Ukraine. And another thing, given that the government changed, the Minister of Information Policy was... I'm almost done. I'm very sorry. Thank you for reminding me that I have to stick to the time allotted to me. And after certain transformations, it turned into the Minister of Culture and Information Policy. And 2 special bodies for country and disinformation were established at the Minister of Culture and Information Policy. The Center for Strategic Communications, and well, for me in the first place, this is all about the strategic communication. That's why I mentioned the name. And the second one is Center for Counter and Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council, NSDC. So the first one is dealing with strategic communications, and the second one is aimed at coordinating the work of the government in this regard. But it is very important to mention that the legislation that is regulating cybersecurity has improved. I wouldn't say that we are exactly safe, but in 2020, when over 10 pages of the Oblast National Police were hacked, and they were disseminating the information about killing 9 Americans during the military exercise in Kherson Oblast. And of course, it is very upsetting that media legislation is still stuck at the level of 2005. And even though we have been discussing the law on media that was approved by all international organizations, at the same time, as far as I understand, Now, the work with the stakeholders is ongoing, and we all are hoping that this law will be regulating not only TV and radio broadcasting, but also other media, such as online media. And this is the need that is quite mature. Now, talking about media and civil society, I'd like to say that society is still the engine of this change and countering the disinformation. Two of our organizations, among them StopFake, started cooperation with Facebook in the role of the independent fact checkers, and they've made a huge contribution to countering disinformation during the COVID pandemic. And it is great that we have many various fact-checking organizations, the ones that are countering disinformation at various levels, that are working permanently, that are permanent. And this is a job that needs to be done. Another thing I'd like to mention, there was a very interesting project that was aimed at building positive narrative. Okay, this is the final thing. Recommendations. So media literacy at all levels, starting from kindergarten. The proper system of countering disinformation. So this system should be a part of the holistic state policy, not like the Ministry of Information Policy used to be in the old days. And we hope that with the emergence of the new bodies and institutions, that will come into life. An audit of the relations and interaction with China to finally understand who are we, only trade partners or strategic partners, to look closer at the threat, look more at China and Asian countries, and create a special research structure for that. I'm very, very sorry for taking up so much time.
Thank you very much, Olga. And now let's move to our next country, to Moldova. And I would like to hand the floor over to Doina Dragomir, one of the authors working on research in Moldova. We know that this year we have new administration in Moldova, and of course we will be discussing their accomplishments after the next research. But what did you inherit from the previous administration?
Hello, everyone. I am honored to be here and to speak in front of you. So the level of disinformation resilience in Moldova has barely changed over the last 3 years. It remains quite limited. In 2018, the government passed a so-called anti-propaganda bill, which targeted Russian content, but it was repealed in 2020. Our authorities, our competent authorities that should fight propaganda, such as the code of the authority of the Council of Audiovisual and the Security and Intelligence Service, are often criticized by the civil society for not fulfilling their duties and even for fighting against the country's, our country's security interests. The parliament also adopted a code of audiovisual media services and a national information security strategy, but both documents are yet to live up to their potential. The code and the strategy are quite simplistic, and they do not approach the problem in depth. Television in Moldova remains the most important source of information, although it's steadily losing ground. Internet, on the other hand, is gaining more popularity. During the COVID-19, people were staying home and consuming a lot of information, both on TV and on the internet. The most popular televisions in Moldova are those that rebroadcast Russian content. So we have Первый канал, Antava Moldova, and RTR Moldova. These channels are occupied the top 3 positions in terms of audience measurements in Moldova. In Moldova, it's the civil society that fights disinformation. We have some independent TV channels and media outlets that also have projects that fight disinformation, but there are not very many. And once the external funding ends, the projects stop. In terms of the government, our government hasn't done very much to fight disinformation and Kremlin propaganda. I can mention only the fact that our security and intelligence service has banned over 50 websites at the beginning of the pandemic. These websites were spreading conspiracies about COVID-19, but also political fake news. They were banned, but this action was criticized by the society because the intelligence and security service did not target those websites that are affiliated to political parties, which were spreading disinformation and fake news. So in 2018, our organization conducted a study, and we analyzed how the Kremlin disinformation narratives work in Moldova. They work on two levels. The first level is presenting Putin as a perfect leader, and the second level of disinformation presented a unrealistic positive picture of life in Russia compared to a social and moral decadence of the West. Of course, these narratives have adopted during the COVID-19 pandemic, and during these 2 years, they were downplaying Western aid to Moldova. They were criticizing the vaccines, the Western vaccines, and they were promoting Russian and Chinese vaccines. Unfortunately, Moldova is vulnerable to disinformation, and we can see this by the results of some polls that were conducted in Moldova. Around 37% of Moldovans believe that Bill Gates was the one that created the virus. It was even the church that has spread, the Orthodox Church that has spread this disinformation at the beginning of the pandemic. In a study that was conducted early this year by the Ministry of Health, 1 in 4 Moldovans say that COVID is not real, and only about 41% would accept a COVID vaccine, which is very sad to see these numbers. In our chapter, we analyze the potential vulnerabilities that Moldova has in regards to Russia and China. So our main vulnerability resides in the energy sector. Moldova is dependent upon Russian gas. The Transnistria has a $7 billion debt, and Gazprom demands this debt to be paid by Moldova. A third vulnerability that we identified are the business ties of Moldovan politicians with Russian oligarchs. So the brother of former President Igor Dodon has business ties with Igor Chaika, which is the son of former chief prosecutor of Russia. Also, Igor Chaika in 2020 became the co-owner of Первый Канал, which is the most watched television in Moldova. A fourth vulnerability that we identified in our study was the linguistic and informational integration of ethnic minorities in Moldova. I refer to Russian-speaking minority, to Ukrainians, to Gagauz, and to Bulgarian. China has become more present in Moldova during the COVID-19 pandemic, largely thanks to COVID equipment donation and vaccine donations, but also the former president has endorsed the Chinese government in Moldova. The oligarch Vladimir Plahotniuk, which fled the country in 2019, he also endorsed the Chinese government and had some visits to China. In our chapter, we put forward several regulatory and institutional recommendations to our authorities. Unfortunately, we found that those recommendations that were made in the 2018 study were not implemented by Moldovan authorities. We believe that the national informational security strategy should have a concrete plan of actions, and that it should define which institutions should implement this plan of actions. And we believe that if no progress will be made, we believe that these institutions should be held accountable for that. We would like to see the Security and Intelligence Service of Moldova to be more involved in countering disinformation and Kremlin propaganda and all types of conspiracy theories that circulate in Moldova. In terms of the Council of Audiovisual, which is the main media regulatory body in Moldova, we believe that it should have more institutional and political independence, because now the members of the council are affiliated politically. We also believe that this council should increase its monitoring and fact-checking capacities. We believe that the state media should transition to public media according to the British and the Czech example. A sixth recommendation that our experts have made in the chapter is that the anti-propaganda bill should be updated, and that the authorities should develop a national strategic communication mechanism to help them better coordinate their messages, especially in times of crisis such as the COVID-19. And my last point are the recommendations for the mass media and for the civil society. We believe that media literacy classes that are implemented in Moldova, that they should target also the vulnerable groups, which are the elderly people, the rural communities, the rural population, and the ethnic minorities. We believe that media outlets should develop permanent fact-checking projects, not just when there is external funding, because once this external funding ends, the projects stop. Media outlets should better cooperate between themselves and with the civil society. And the last recommendation that I want to point out is the fact that Moldovan media should expand the coverage of foreign news. Right now, it's the Russian televisions that dominate this segment, which influences a lot Moldovan opinion on international affairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Дуже дякую.
Thank you very much. And now let's move to our next country, to Georgia. And in recent weeks, there's been heightened interest in the country after former Georgian politician returned there. And this backdrop, there's been more coverage of Georgia in mass media. There's been more information about Georgia. And I would like to give the floor over to Lasha Tugushi, who worked on the Georgian part of the research. So could you share with us what's the situation in Georgia?
Thank you very much. You mean former president of Georgia? I see. First of all, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. And also I'd like to say thank you to organizers for such a interesting to have such an interesting discussions around very important issue. And I will try to briefly describe the disinformation process and trends in Georgia over the past 3 years, as well as achievements and remaining challenges. I will make it short and will outline the most acute areas and issues which laid the ground for the formulation of respective, finally respective recommendations. Second slide is about all the versus new realities. The Kremlin's disinformation remains a widespread phenomenon in Georgia and represents an acute challenge for Georgia. It has acquired a new destructive impetus amid the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, when it became possible to use the so-called infodemic as one of the hybrid challenges. It has manifested itself in the conduct of anti-Western and anti-pro-Kremlin disinformation campaigns. The latter aims to discredit Western institutions and counterbalance them by creating positive image of Russia. Since 2018, the Georgian government and civil society have taken certain measures to address the persisting challenges. It remains rather complicated task for Georgia, having in mind the difficulty of fighting undemocratic systems in a democracy. This is very important issue, I think. And at the same time, it's clear that stronger efforts are needed both from state institutions and the general public, include civil society, to effectively counter the Kremlin destructive influence in the country. One of the anti-Western messages is that the West is helping Georgia in exchange for fighting against the traditional institutions, including church, family values, and broadly saying the Georgian identity. The results of media monitoring and fake news debunking, which go beyond media outlets focusing on politicians, the clergy, public organizations, and public figures, show an upward trend and anti-Western messages, particularly in anti-American and anti-NATO messages on Facebook. Statements in support of Russia increased, conveying messages about the need to revise the foreign policy core course of Georgia and the need to engage one-on-one with Kremlin in order to settle existing conflict. We have two conflicts in the occupation, also our territories. More than 20 to 20% of our territories are occupied by Russian militaries. In line with anti-Western rhetoric, Russian propaganda has intensified, spreading positive messages. For example, the announced creation of vaccine by Russia was followed by the activation of pro-Kremlin media in Georgia and manipulation campaign. Russia vaccine Sputnik 5 is presented in a better light than Western vaccines, for example, Pfizer or other one. It's said to be safer and better tested. Relation with Russia and China, it's very important issue in our research. The positions of Russia and China in relation to Georgia in terms of foreign trade are getting stronger. The analysis of the last 2 years makes it evident that both countries maintain a leading role in Georgian economy. Moreover, China moved from 5th to 1st place in Georgia's external export. Russia holds the 2nd place. Consequently, these countries might exercise a certain influence on Georgia due to their military political and economic impact, as well as their different foreign policy and anatomy. At the same time, public opinion polls, I'd like to underline this issue, show that the general acceptance of both Moscow and Beijing among Georgians citizens is not high. These two different external problems Russia and China have in common the fear they instill in Georgia that their influence may harm their Georgian identity. Legal and institutional framework. Overall, Georgian legislation is liberal in this field, which requires even more consolidation of society against hybrid challenges, more knowledge, as well as strong democratic response. I'd like to emphasize this, more democratic response. This is a rather difficult task in the counter of polarization, what we have. You mentioned last event, what happened in Georgia, and the transfer of political attention and emphasis to internal confrontation. Despite the fact that the existing political crisis depreciated the intention of Georgia to officially apply for the EU membership by 2024, I'd like to say that all parties, include opposition parties, promised Georgian society to make kind of steps in 2024. Still, it has been noted that the authorities proceed with the work on several strategic documents in given direction. In 2018, strategic communication units were established in all ministries in response to the growing threats of anti-Western propaganda. However, experts criticize the government's efforts in combating pro-Kremlin disinformation, including the inefficiency of ministerial Stratcom units. I think they are quite weak in that direction. The annual reports of the Security Service of Georgia also deserve attention. According to the latest report 2020, the hybrid threats coming from foreign countries include Russia and their intelligence services using disinformation, soft power, and clandestine operations had an essentially negative impact. Next one is Georgia has become a target of Russian disinformation many times in the past. Perhaps one of the most far-reaching disinformation campaigns relates to the functioning of Richard Lugar, maybe you know, Richard Lugar Public Health Research Center, a research center laboratory that contains the public health systems referral library and boasts some of the best biomedical and biosafety researchers established in Tbilisi with the US support. The allegations that biological weapons are being produced in the Lugar lab was supported by President Vladimir Putin, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, the Russian military, MPs, and the Kremlin's other propagandists. President Putin has even suggested that the weapons produced in the lab were intended to target Russia. Yeah. After the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, Lugar's lab was turned into a new target with suggestions that the 2019 coronavirus had been created there. It's really very interesting issue here. A response by media CSO, there are several civil society organizations who conduct debunking activity. It's interesting to see what preventive mechanisms can be used by society against the Kremlin's influences. Hereby, a debunking initiative by NGOs for instance, is fed against, this is one of the examples, against the pro-Kremlin media platform News Front, having a sizable online outreach. Should be mentioned, the Facebook administration removed the News Front page and 12 fake accounts linked with it, who were disseminating disinformation. And last one, recommendations, we have a couple of them. First one is to continue scientific studies. I think it's very important. Second one, to also I think it's very important to officially restrict the activities of Russian foundations in Georgia. Their funding is often aimed at undermining the country's sovereignty and etc. And last one, to encourage the teaching of media literacy. What about we are talking also, we talked also before. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Дуже дякую.
Thank you very
І
much.
зараз ми почули
And
презентації.
we have just listened to the presentations from 3 countries. And I think that you have seen that there are very many commonalities. Because at the very least, all of these countries are declaring that they want to get out of the Russian sphere of influence, that they want to facilitate their Euro-Atlantic aspirations. I think the situation with Belarus is quite different, though. And I would like to ask Aliaksandr Papko, who collected the information about Belarus, to tell us about how things stand in Belarus. What makes it different, and what are the commonalities?
Thank you much for being present here, and thank you, the organizer of this event, for inviting us here to present the similarities and differences between our countries. So Belarus, along with Azerbaijan, belongs to the outliers. So countries where the media sphere is under severe pressure from the regimes, from the state, which is not based on the rule of law. And that's why speaking now about legal changes, it's quite difficult, because the authorities pursue their interests, not applying the legal measures, so they just manipulate the law. And if 2 years ago we could speak about some legal changes, or could analyze the situation in a really similar way to our colleagues from Georgia or Moldova, after 2020 mass protests in Belarus, this approach has become irrelevant. So everything in Belarus is based, can be analyzed through the perspective of deep political conflict within the society. So there is a huge opposition between the state authorities, increasingly more repressive, increasingly more authoritarian, and the society which is opposed to the state, passively or actively. So, and if we speak about the changes in relations with Russia and China in the last 2 years, I will say just really briefly. If we speak about Russia in last 2 years, so before 2012, the relations with Russia were quite tense. It was related to the idea of Russia to decrease energy subsidies to Alexander Lukashenko regime, and and also it was related to the pressure of Kremlin authorities for deeper integration. There were so-called integration maps developed between Minsk and Moscow. And at the beginning of the year of the elections in Belarus, as I told you, the relations were quite tense. Lukashenko even accused Russia in sending mercenaries to Minsk with the goal to destabilize the political situation in Belarus. So when the protests broke out, the relations between Minsk and Moscow have become increasingly more cooperative, like in good previous years. So Vladimir Putin was among the few leaders who officially recognized Alexander Lukashenko. they also signed an agreement which allows Russian Federation to send its troops to Belarus, even without notifying the Belarusian authorities. Here I mentioned Rosgvardia, so National Guards, Russian internal troops to Belarus. Also, despite the promises of economic support, they were quite limited. Until now, Belarus has received about 1.5 billions of dollars in loans, although Alexander Lukashenko demanded much more. And probably the biggest support Vladimir Putin gave to Alexander Lukashenko is the information support. When people from state TV went on strike, technical staff was replaced by people invited from Russia. So for several months, Russian TV staff technicians were working on Belarusian state TV, and also the rhetorics of Russian state-controlled media have changed towards Alexander Lukashenko. They were started to say about Western plot against Lukashenko, about the some fascist putsch in Belarus, nationalist forces inspired by the West, which try to take power. So the rhetorics were very, very similar to what we could hear during Maidan times in Ukraine. And also the last change in relations, it's increased military cooperation. Probably it's another significant change in relations with Russia. They're preparing, so they recently opened the training center for air forces and anti-air defense on the western border of Belarus near Grodno regions, in Grodno region. So it's at the border with Poland and Lithuania. But as I could say, so the rhetorics have become more friendly, but no money was provided as Lukashenko expected, and military cooperation has become more increased. So the relations, and if we talk about Belarusian vulnerabilities towards Russia, they are compared to what we noticed in our research from 2017-2018. Military personnel, retired people, and people living in small cities where the economic situation is worsening. So probably now these pro-Kremlin narratives are more popular among among the military and police forces of Lukashenko, because those narratives, those pan-Slavic, anti-Western narratives, they allow to keep the loyalty of those people. So that's why they are used in those bodies, but they are not so active. They are not so efficient in the rest of the society. So if we talk about relations with China and potential vulnerabilities, we should say that China is the second largest provider of loans to the Lukashenko regime. About 1/5 of loans Belarus have taken were taken from China. Second, for more than a decade, Alexander Lukashenko is trying to modernize Belarusian economy thanks to Chinese loans, Chinese investments, but today, the majority of Chinese investments are quite problematic. They do not generate huge profits. Some of them are disastrous. Probably the most successful project is the project of car factory Geely near Minsk. Another big project is Belarus Chinese Industrial Park. More than 60 firms are registered there, but up to now, this industrial park imports from China more than exports, so it's not generating huge profit. About more than 50% of Chinese goods coming to Europe go through Belarusian territory. So for this point of view, Belarus is very important for China, and Chinese authorities apply the same politics in Belarus as they apply along the New Silk Road. But as I told you, despite the many efforts of Minsk, the influence, economic influence of China, cultural influence of China, it's not so high as it's supposed to be. The only tangible results, positive results, which you can see, are in the military field, where Chinese help Minsk to build its own rocket launcher system, which is quite important to Minsk because the range is more than 500 kilometers, and it's very important defense weapon used by Minsk, as opposed to Russia, because Russia did not agree to provide such weapons to Belarus. So, but after 2020, we could not see the increase in cooperation with China, as opposed to Russia.
Олександр, у нас 1 хвилина.
Oh,
Alexander, I have only 1 minute left.
Okay. What happened in Belarus? Here you can see the unprecedented really repressions against civil society in Belarus, and we could expect really the disastrous situation concerning the resilience to propaganda in Belarus, but it did not happen, in fact. So here we can see the most popular Telegram channels in Belarus. Almost all of them have been declared extremist, and the government is fighting against them. So they cannot block Telegram, so they declare this channel extremist. It's one of the examples of the repressions against journalists. The majority of journalists in Belarus are working from abroad now. But what happened? First, state media started to replicate Kremlin narratives in a very primitive, in a very basic way. So, like Western plot against Alexander Lukashenko, global conspiracy against Belarus and Russia. But the popularity of state TV or state media dropped dramatically. If in 2017 about 70% of Belarusians received political information from state media, and it was in majority TV, now it's only about 20%, and the trust has decreased from 75% to 20% now. People shifted to the websites and to the Telegram channels. Every third Belarusian now is getting political news from telegrams. And so still Kremlin has the possibilities to influence web users, but it is through aggregators like Yandex. And also another vulnerability coming from new situation is the vulnerability related to Telegram channels. Fact-checking in Telegram is quite difficult, but still the most popular sources of information like independent websites and Telegram channels, they're doing quite a lot of work concerning debunking, because debunking, it's their daily basis job. So why in Azerbaijan and Belarus debunking is so popular? Because journalists are fighting against state propaganda, so they are doing debunking every day. And yeah, this is one of the quotes we received from one of our experts. So, as you can see in these two sentences, the essence of changes in media sphere in Belarus is concluded. Yeah, and what are the recommendations? They are different as compared to my colleagues. We did not focus on legal changes because Belarus is not rule of law. Yeah, exactly. And these are recommendations for international community and for Belarusian media themselves. So first, we should be prepared to work in new situation and more focus on our personal security, on getting information from new sources, to establish contacts with the readership, with our audience, to get the information directly from the audience. Second, we should be even more active in debunking, fact-checking, promote Belarusian national identity as a shield against Kremlin, pro-Kremlin, or pro-Lukashenko narratives, which are similar to Kremlin ones. And also, we should develop independent sociology, because sociological network in Belarus was also destroyed. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Дуже дякую, Олександр. І в нас є час небагато, але час на запитання. Дякую.
Thank you so much, Alexander. Now we have some time for the Q&A session. We're quite limited in time for the Q&A, but if you have any questions or comments, now is the high time.
Добрий день, колеги.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Sергій Гриценко. I work at EU delegation, and among other things, I help coordinate anti-disinformation projects.
First, I would like to congratulate really German Marshall Fund and Visegrad Fund for this impressive study. However, even just last week, we participated with our colleagues at a strategic session where we planned our support to the new strategic communication center, which is now successfully working with the ministry, with the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy. And when we were discussing challenges, one of the main things that everybody talked about was about everything we do belongs to a bubble. And this is exactly what I'm seeing now. Look at this intimate presentation. I understand. So my question will be, what are your plans? How to use this index in policy making, in project design, in programming? What are the possible solutions that we need to take beyond this bubble, beyond the bubble of academia, expert journalists, and all that? And if I may, my last point, I would like to use the opportunity of having a rare opportunity to talk to an expert from Moldova, Doina. I think you are quite shy when you are, when you are assessing what is happening in Moldova. And let me prove myself. Look at your parliamentary elections, which just happened in July. And what we've seen, convincing victory for PAS, Party of Action, and President Maia Sandu. And this is happening in your country, where media landscape, as we all know, heavily, manipulated by Russia and all that. However, people came out in support of PAS and Maia Sandu. Does it mean that disinformation didn't work? In your view, what happened? Why it met with such a public, strong public response? Thank you.
Дякую за запитання.
Thank you very much for your question. Who would like to be the first to speak?
First of all, thank you very much for your words, Sergey. And I would like to one more stress that German Marshall Fund and Visegrad Fund are the sponsors of this research, but who did it was East Center, Media Centers Ukraine, Liberal Academy Georgia, Watchdog in Moldova. So it was NGOs who did this research, which kind of is answering a little bit of your question, the second question. So in our opinion, the more organizations, civil society organizations with more outreach are part of this kind of projects, the better it is. Of course, such activities are impossible without foreign support, without foreign funding, and without sometimes quick response from big international organizations on what is happening. One of the reasons, and I think we didn't mention it, why we specifically were looking into China this time is that what was happening during the pandemic. The European Union reacted very, very slowly on the disinformation coming from China in terms of the source of their virus and what was happening. And then they kind of failed in the vaccine and pandemic kind of assistance diplomacy, let's be honest, because China is very active in promoting themselves as the main supporter and assistant of provider of masks and all this equipment to Italy, to France, to Germany, to Slovakia, to many countries. So of course, it is important that we remain partners and we remain in touch in terms of what we can do. As long as we work all together, as long as we have roundtables, more discussions like this one, many exchanges of opinions, the better it is. I think Ukraine is a great example overall of how you're working on your legislation, how you're working on your projects, because you have here OC participating, the EU, Council of Europe, and of course, wonderful colleagues from really great professional specialists in this field who constantly in contact with you. And of course, then it is easier also to proliferate this information, to disseminate it. I mean, the results of research like this one, because then we can, with this kind of set of tools, of course, we can speak whether we can go to schools, whether we can go to universities, whether we can go to journalists, and so on and so forth. So in this way, we can see how to approach this question. And I think Doina can answer the next question. Thank you. Or maybe Olga, you want?
First of all, thank you for the question. I think we can admit that the resilience against political disinformation in Moldova has increased. Largely is due to the fact that Moldovans are tired of oligarchs ruling our country. Moldovans are tired of all the lies that they have had to listen to over the past years. They are tired that the corruption is so infiltrated in all of the aspects of Moldovan life. Another reason why we believe that political resilience, the resilience against political disinformation increased in Moldova is due to the activity of civil society and independent media outlets. So we have been fighting and trying to promote media literacy and to inform people about the danger of propaganda and Kremlin narratives. So it's a common effort that has given some beautiful and some beautiful results. We hope that that our resilience against disinformation will increase furthermore. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Aliaksandr Papko. I'm head of the Center of Defense Reforms. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the comprehensive research and presentations that we heard today.
If I need to switch to English as well, if you want, I definitely can. Yeah, maybe for our colleagues it would be more convenient. So thank you again. To continue that opinion previous speaker expressed, I think that again it's very important to understand that this war is war of influence, right? And it's fight for actually behavior of the audience. And from this point of view, we have to understand that this is not enough to educate people. So this is not enough to explain them how to. Not to be manipulated, and to be honest, it's not even possible to educate them to do that, because if we have dealt with really sophisticated sort of not propaganda but real, special influence operations, active measures, it's not possible to distinguish them not only for general audience, journalists, but even for representatives of secret services. And this is actually why they are conducted by other secret services, and that's why they can really shape the reality. So I think that this is very important to think about that international network of action, if you want, and international network of positive influence, in sense of not just checking the influence of the enemy, but also providing your own if you want information for people to make probably different decisions. And again, I think that Moldova case, as we can see, that was actually consequence of existence of that, counter narratives and, counter network of media outlets and other influencers who could provide, let's say, alternative point of view to the final customer. Thank you.
І ми маємо прохання з Праги, так я розумію.
And as far as I understand, we have a
слово
question
Празі.
from Prague. So over to Prague.
Так, дякую. Just maybe briefly from my side also to respond to the previous question. We have started with the first presentation in Prague actually just at the beginning of September for two reasons. First, Czechia was about to face elections, so that was a crucial timing to set the agenda for not only the situation before the vote, but also more importantly after the vote. We will have very soon a change in the government, and these recommendations will be very much on the table. We have presented them to politicians and Czech stakeholders. That is first. Second, why we decided for Prague is that Czechia has the EU presidency in the second half of 2022, and one of the crucial priorities for the Czech upcoming EU presidency related to Eastern Partnership is going to be the issue of resilience, together with economic recovery and the green agenda. So here, once again, we have a comprehensive study on what the EU and individual member states might be doing. And finally, that is also related to the EU delegation in Kiev. So we will be having a presentation at the very end of this month for your colleagues in Brussels, together with the Eastern Partnership Division and also permanent representation of the Czech Republic and other colleagues based in Brussels. So this will be the third sort of pillar, how we are trying to make the impact and make our voice heard with very good and solid recommendations, as we have heard today from colleagues from Georgia, Moldova, Belarus, but also other countries. Thank you so much.
Дуже дякую за цей коментар і
Thank you very much for your comment. Thank you very much for the questions. It's not yet time to say goodbye. We are wrapping up our formal part, but you are all welcome to go and talk and communicate informally during our coffee break that we're going to have after this presentation. We will stop the live broadcast. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, dear speakers, for your presentations. And my hope is that the recipes that we heard today will be implemented, and hopefully this will be helpful to prevent us from being vulnerable to external threats. Thank you very much.